On the ground. Kneel. Now. The words hit the October air like a fist, and before Denise Harmon could finish saying, "Sir, I was just filling up the officer's boot," caught the inside of her ankle, and she staggered sideways against the pump, catching herself on the metal with both palms, the cold steel biting into her skin. Stolen valor. His voice dropped into something uglier, something that had been waiting all day for a reason to come out. Filthy fraud. You wear that patch like you earned something. You never earned a damn thing in your life. My military ID is in my back pocket. Her voice was level, flat, the voice of someone who had trained herself out of panic a long time ago. He snorted, actually snorted the sound thick with contempt. Please. She kept her hands visible. She knew how to do this. Your pocket. He repeated it like it was the punchline to a joke, only he understood. And then he laughed, a short, sharp exhale that had no warmth in it at all. I'm not reaching into your filthy pocket. God knows what's in there. He yanked both arms behind her back in one practiced motion. The cuffs clicked twice once for each wrist, and the metal was cold and tight and deliberate. A colonel. He said it with the particular cruelty of a man who has already decided the answer before asking the question. You funniest thing I've heard all week. You people can't even follow basic orders, and you want me to believe you give them. She said nothing. Jaw clenched. Eyes forward. Breathing slow, and even the way she'd learned to breathe before every hard call, every moment that required her to be more than what someone expected her to be. 14 people watched from the parking lot and the road and the windows of the convenience store. Nobody moved. She had survived things this man could not imagine. He didn't know that yet. But he was about to find out. The Riverside Fuel and Go sat just off Route 61, about 38 miles south of Fort Bragg. 2 pumps, a convenience store with a cracked awning, and a hand-painted sign advertising day-old coffee for 99 cents, and a parking lot that hadn't been properly repaved since the 1990s. The asphalt cracked and patched and cracked again in ways that made it look like something under the surface had been pushing against it for years and finally given up. It was the kind of place you stopped at because your tank was nearly empty, not because you wanted to. It was a Wednesday afternoon in late October, and the sky above Route 61 was the color of old denim, and the air smelled like diesel and cut grass, and the particular kind of quiet that settles over a stretch of highway right before the light starts to go. Denise Harmon pulled her dark blue Jeep Grand Cherokee into Pump 2 and sat there for a moment with the engine off and her hand still on the wheel and her eyes closed, and she didn't do anything else for a long time. Just breathed. 9 months. That was how long she had been gone this time. 9 months at a forward operating base, managing logistics for a battalion of 800 soldiers, running on 18-hour days, and satellite calls with her son Isaiah at odd hours, and meals eaten standing up, because there was never a reason to sit down when you were already moving on to the next thing. 9 months of making decisions that other people's lives depended on, of holding it together, so that the people under her command could hold it together, of being exactly what the Army needed her to be every single day, regardless of what she needed. And now she was 38 miles from home. She stepped out, stretched her arms above her head, and her lower back cracked twice a sound that felt more satisfying than it had any right to. And then she reached back into the car and pulled out her phone and texted Isaiah, 38 minutes. What do you want to eat? 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then anything that's not an MRE. She smiled. It was the first real smile in weeks, the kind that reaches the muscles around the eyes and loosens something in the chest. And she stood there in the October air, holding it for a second, before she pocketed the phone and turned to the pump. She was wearing a gray Army hoodie, soft faded, washed so many times the fabric had gone almost translucent at the elbows, and on the left shoulder was the patch of the 82nd Airborne Division. No rank insignia, no name tape, no uniform. Just a woman in comfortable clothes at the end of a very long road, the kind of clothes you wear when you're finally allowed to just be a person for a few hours. She had enlisted at 19, grown up outside of Savannah, with a mother who worked 2 jobs, and a father who left when she was 6, and a recruiter who came to her high school and told her she could see the world, and she'd believed him. And it turned out he was right, though not in the ways she'd expected. She'd stayed because she was good at it, better than good. The kind of good that moves through resistance, the way water moves through rock, slowly and completely. And 22 years later, she had 3 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars in a drawer at home, and 800 soldiers who counted on her to be right more often than she was wrong. She walked into the convenience store. A bell jingled. The cashier, her name tag read, Amber, 21 or so, blonde ponytail, scrolling her phone with the automatic efficiency of someone waiting out a slow afternoon, looked up. They talked for a moment, the way strangers do when one of them is wearing a military patch. Amber had a brother at Fort Bragg Infantry, and her eyes went a little wide when Denise said she was 82nd Airborne. The genuine surprise of someone who hadn't quite put those 2 things together before. And then Denise bought a bottle of water and a pack of peanut butter crackers, and stepped back into the October air, and leaned against the Jeep, and unscrewed the cap on the water, and drank. Normal? Ordinary. The kind of Wednesday afternoon that looks exactly like every other Wednesday afternoon. At Pump 1, a man in his mid-50s named Carl stood with his hand on the gas cap. Sandy gray hair, a Carhartt jacket, the face of someone who has worked outdoors his whole life. A woman in a minivan with 2 kids in the back seat had pulled up near the air pump. Across the road on the sidewalk, a teenager named Darius Webb had stopped his bicycle and was standing with 1 foot on the pedal and his phone in his hand, not filming yet, just watching with the particular alertness of a 16-year-old who has learned that interesting things happen when you pay attention. Denise drank her water. 38 miles. She was thinking about Isaiah's voice, about how good a long shower was going to feel, about the way her own bed was going to feel like a specific kind of luxury that no one who hadn't spent 9 months on a cot could fully appreciate. She did not notice the patrol car pulling into the lot. Officer Kyle Brandt was 27 years old, 4 years on the Greenfield police force, and he had grown up in this county, the way some people grow up inside an institution, not just living in it, but shaped by it, formed by it, the institution becoming so much a part of the structure of his thinking that he couldn't always tell where it ended, and he began. His father had been a cop. His uncle had been a cop. His grandfather had been a sheriff's deputy back when the county ran 3 patrol cars, and everybody knew everybody's name, and the world made a certain kind of sense that Brandt had spent most of his adult life trying to locate again the way you keep reaching for something in your pocket that isn't there anymore. He parked the cruiser at a diagonal angle near the air pump, not because he needed to, but because it occupied space in a way that felt like authority, and stepped out and adjusted his belt the way officers do when they want you to notice what's attached to it, and rolled his neck and put a fresh piece of spearmint gum in his mouth and scanned the parking lot. He did this quickly, efficiently, the way a man does it when he's been doing it for 4 years and has developed, without fully examining it, a shorthand for sorting people into categories before they've said a single word. The man at Pump 1 white Carhartt jacket baseball cap pulled low. Fine. The woman in the minivan, white 2 kids visible through the window. Fine. The woman at Pump 2 black army hoodie patch on the left shoulder, leaning against a dark blue Jeep with a bottle of water in her hand, relaxed and unhurried, in the way of someone who belongs exactly where she is. Brandt stopped walking. He stood there for a full 5 seconds just looking. And what bothered him, though, he could not have articulated it. this precisely, could not have found the exact words for it. Even if you'd asked him to try, was not the patch, and not the Jeep, and not anything she had done or said. What bothered him was the ease of her, the way she stood there like she had every right to be standing there, like the thought that anyone might question it had never occurred to her, like the world was a place that had always made room for her presence without requiring her to justify it first. He started walking toward her. He was not a large man exactly, but he carried himself like one's shoulders, set wide, chest forward, the deliberate pace of someone who has decided, before the first step, what the outcome of the next 30 seconds is going to be. His face was flat and broad, with a square jaw and pale blue eyes that always seemed to be open just slightly too wide. Not alert, exactly, more like the eyes of someone who has already made a decision and is just waiting for the world to catch up to it. His badge was polished. His shoes were polished. Everything about him said, prepared, though it was the kind of preparation that has never been tested by anything it wasn't already expecting. 3 generations of law enforcement. That was how Brandt thought about himself, not as an individual officer who had made individual choices, but as the continuation of something, a line that ran through his grandfather's deputy's badge and his uncle's commendations, and his father's 22 years on the force, and landed here in him, in this parking lot, on this Wednesday afternoon in October, certain in the way that only people who have never seriously questioned their own certainty can be certain. He had grown up being told that the most important thing an officer could have was instinct, the ability to read a situation before it told you what it was, to trust what your gut said, even when your eyes hadn't confirmed it yet. His father had said it. His grandfather had said it. The training academy had said it in different words. And standing in that parking lot looking at a black woman in an army hoodie who was too comfortable, too self-possessed, too unhurried for his gut to make easy sense of Kyle Brandt, trusted his instinct, the way he had always trusted it. He didn't see a veteran. He didn't see 22 years of service, or 3 combat deployments, or 800 soldiers, or the bronze stars in the drawer. He saw an anomaly, something that didn't fit the pattern he carried inside him, like a map of the world drawn by 3 generations of men who had looked at this county and divided it quietly into the people who belonged and the people who needed to be explained. He walked toward her, not fast, not slow, and when she looked up from her phone with a completely neutral expression, he said in a voice that had already reached its verdict, "Ma'am, that hoodie you're wearing, where'd you get it?" Denise looked down at the hoodie, at the faded gray fabric, at the 82nd Airborne patch she'd worn so long she sometimes forgot it was there. And then she looked back up at him with an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. "It's mine," she said. "I'm in the Army." "You're in the Army." He said it flat, the way you repeat something back when you're not asking for clarification, but making clear you've already decided it's not true. "Yes, sir. 82nd Airborne. I'm stationed at Fort Bragg." "Uh-huh." He took one step closer, close enough now that she could smell the spearmint gum on his breath, sharp and artificial in the October air. "And what rank are you supposed to be? She caught that. Filed it away. "I'm a colonel," she said. He let out a short breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh, something that wanted to be a laugh, but couldn't quite commit to it. "A colonel. You." "Yes, you got ID in my back pocket." "My COC card," she added. "Let me get it for you," and reached slowly the particular slowness of a person who has spent 22 years learning to move carefully around armed men who've decided not to trust you, and pulled the card out and held it out to him between 2 steady fingers. He took it the way you take something you've already decided is contaminated. He turned it over, held it up to the afternoon light, and tilted it back and forth, the way people check a counterfeit bill at a convenience store. his eyes narrowing like he was looking for the flaw he already knew was there. "This could be anybody's," he said. "It has my name on it," she said. "My rank, my photo, my branch of service. Yeah, I can read." He flicked the edge of the card with his thumbnail, a small dismissive gesture that managed to communicate contempt more efficiently than anything he'd said so far. "I can also tell when something doesn't add up." He launched into it. Then the speech that had been building behind his eyes since he crossed the parking lot, his voice dropping lower, not quieter, harder, like a door closing in a house where all the windows are already shut. He'd caught people walking around in military gear they never earned. Grown men sobbing at VFW posts about tours that existed only in their heads. Women who put on camouflage for social media pictures and called themselves veterans. "It was disgusting," he said, and his voice carried the particular heat of someone who has found a moral position that makes them feel righteous without requiring them to examine themselves. "I didn't buy anything online," Officer Denise said, and her voice was still level. Still the voice of someone who has learned that some battles are won by not moving. "I've served 22 years. 22 years. He looked her up and down, slowly, an inventory, the kind of look that catalogs a person and deliberately comes up short. "And you're filling up at a gas station in a hoodie. No uniform, no escort, no nothing. Just a faded sweatshirt and a card that could have been printed at a copy shop for $12. "Officers don't travel in uniform on personal leave," she said. "That's standard protocol." Something shifted in his face. His voice dropped again into something quieter and somehow colder than everything before it. "Don't lecture me on protocol. I know protocol. I come from 3 generations of law enforcement. And what I also know is that stolen valor is a federal crime." "You know what that means?" "I know exactly what it means," she said. "Good. Then you know I can arrest you right now." Denise's hands were at her sides. She had not shifted her weight, had not crossed her arms, not clenched her jaw, not taken a single step in any direction, because 22 years of service and a lifetime spent navigating rooms where someone looked at her and saw the wrong thing first had taught her that the worst thing a black woman could do in front of a white officer who needed to be right was give him a reason. Any reason. Even a sigh. "Officer," she said, "I'm asking you to verify my identity through the Department of Defense database. 1 phone call. That's all it takes." "I don't need to make a phone call," he said. "I've got eyes. And my eyes are telling me plenty." He keyed his radio. The words that came through it into the October air were the kind that stay in a person's ears for a long time after. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. Need backup at Riverside Fuel and go on Route 61. Possible stolen valor. Suspect being uncooperative." Uncooperative. Denise heard the word and understood exactly what it was doing, how it was rewriting the last several minutes into a version of events where she had been difficult resistant, a problem that required backup, rather than a woman who had handed over her ID and answered every question and hadn't taken a single step in any direction. Carl had stopped pumping gas. He was standing by his truck with one hand resting on the bed, watching not with hostility, but with the careful calculating stillness of someone trying to decide whether what he's watching is serious enough to require him to do something about it. The woman in the minivan had rolled her window down. Her 2 kids in the back seat were leaning toward the glass, and across the road, Darius Webb had straightened up on his bicycle and pulled his phone out of his pocket and was holding it at his side, not filming yet, but ready with the particular wariness of a 16-year-old who has seen enough of the world to know when something is about to go wrong. 4 minutes later, a second cruiser pulled in. Officer Dana Pryor stepped out, mid-30s. Reddish-brown hair, cut short, a quiet face that gave less away than Brandt's, the face of someone who processes first and reacts second. She walked over with her thumbs hooked in her vest and took in the scene. In one measured look, a black woman standing completely still beside a Jeep Brandt, pacing in a tight arc in front of her, like something on a short leash, the parking lot coiled with a tension that had nothing to do with anything that had actually happened. She looked at Denise, then at the CAC card still in Brandt's hand. "Did you run the card?" she asked. "Don't need to." He didn't hesitate, didn't look at her. "Look at her. Look at her." 3 words. Pryor was quiet for a beat that lasted long enough for something to move behind her eyes, doubt or recognition, or the specific discomfort of someone who knows they're watching something wrong and hasn't yet decided whether saying so is worth the cost. She looked at Denise. She looked at the card. She looked at the hologram on the front of it, the Department of Defense seal pressed into the plastic in the way that cannot be replicated at a copy shop. "Maybe we should just call it in," she said to Brandt, lowering her voice, but not enough. "Run the card. I'm not calling anything in. I've got probable cause. She's wearing military insignia she didn't earn. That's a federal crime. She gave you a CAC card. Could be fake. It has a DOD hologram on it, Kyle." His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared a small, visible thing, the body announcing what the face is trying to keep from showing. "Are you backing me up, or not?" Pryor looked at the ground, then at her own cruiser, parked 20 feet away, measuring the distance to somewhere easier. And then she stepped back. 1 step. That was it. That was the whole thing. Denise had seen it before. She had seen it in briefing rooms and parking lots, and 100 small moments that never make the news because they never get filmed, the good ones, who say nothing, standing right beside the bad ones, who say everything. The bad ones you can fight. You know where they are, you know what they're going to do, and you can position yourself accordingly. The silent ones just let it happen. And the thing that makes that so much harder is that they always look like they feel bad about it. Brandt turned back to her. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to put your hands on the vehicle." Denise looked at him for a long, quiet moment, the kind of look that doesn't require anger or fear to carry its full weight. And then she turned and placed her palms flat on the warm metal of the Jeep's hood, and she felt the texture of the paint under her fingertips and the sun still stored in the metal, and she focused on those things, on the specific physical reality of them, because that was what you did when the world tilted and you needed something solid to hold on to. He moved in close behind her, close enough that she could smell the spearmint gum again, sharp and artificial, and feel the particular pressure of someone who is using proximity as a tool. And he started the pat-down, and from the first motion, she knew it was not a lawful search. She knew lawful searches. She had been trained in detainee handling in 3 different countries, had written the protocols for how prisoners were to be treated. In the field, had enforced those protocols for 2 decades. And what Brandt was doing bore no resemblance to any of them. His hands moved differently, not the efficient procedural movement of someone conducting a search, but the slower, deliberate movement of someone making a point, of someone performing authority for an audience that had gathered without being invited. He found her phone first, pulled it from her pocket, glanced at the screen. Isaiah's last message was still visible. "Anything that's not an MRE," and Brandt looked at it for a half-second, and then set the phone down on the hood of the Jeep. The way you set down something you've already decided doesn't matter. And the screen hit the metal with a crack, a thin fracture line splitting across the glass and running directly through her son's words. She felt it in her chest. She didn't make a sound. He pulled out her wallet next and went through it with his thumb, like he was shuffling a deck of cards, her military credit union card, her Georgia driver's license, a folded receipt, and then he stopped at the photograph. Isaiah at her promotion ceremony, in a yellow sundress, holding a small American flag, grinning the specific grin of a kid who is proud of his mother and not trying to hide it. "Who's this Brandt?" held the photo up. "My son," she said. "At my promotion ceremony." When I made Colonel. He looked at the photo. He looked at her. And then he tossed the wallet onto the hood next to the cracked phone, and the photograph slid out and landed face down on the warm metal, the yellow sundress disappearing against gray paint. Then he went to the Jeep and opened the rear door. No warrant, no consent, no pause. Just a man who had decided that the normal rules of the situation did not apply to him. And Denise said, "You cannot search my vehicle without a warrant or my consent," in a voice as controlled and clear as she could make it. And he said, "Probable cause." "I don't need your permission, sweetheart." And he unzipped the duffel bag in the back seat. Inside were her Army combat uniforms, folded with the sharp, perfect creases that take 20 minutes, with a flat iron and institutional practice name tape, reading Harmon rank insignia, the silver eagle of a full colonel catching the afternoon light. Underneath a leather portfolio worn at the corners from years of use. He opened it, official transfer orders stamped and signed. A letter of commendation from a 2-star general. Her Bronze Star citation, 2 full pages. Single-spaced, describing actions in a combat zone. Pryor had moved closer without seeming to intend to. She was reading over Brandt's shoulder. He turned without looking at her, shoved the portfolio back into the bag, and zipped it closed with a sharp final motion that made the Jeep rock on its suspension. Could buy those online. Kyle. Pryor's voice was tight in a different way now. "Kyle, that's a 2-star general's signature, with a unit seal and an official Army letterhead." He didn't answer. He turned back to Denise, and his voice came out loud. Now louder than it needed to be, the voice of a man who has noticed the audience and decided to use it. And what he said next was the thing that could not be unsaid. The sentence that would follow him for the rest of his life in the testimony of every person standing in that parking lot. He said he thought she'd found this stuff somewhere, or stolen it from someone who had actually served, because in his experience, and he had plenty. Women like her did not make colonel. Women like her didn't command anything. Not a platoon, not a desk, not a single thing. Because it took discipline, he said, and it took standards, and it took a certain kind of person. And she wasn't it. The parking lot was absolutely quiet for the 3 seconds after he finished speaking, and in that quiet, Darius Webb raised his phone and pressed record. He had already been live on Facebook for 4 minutes. The view count was at 11,000 and climbing. Brandt reached for the handcuffs on his belt. "Turn around," he said. "Hands behind your back." Denise turned slowly with the deliberate composure of someone who has decided that every motion she makes right now is going to be something a camera can look at without finding a single flaw. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since he'd crossed the parking lot, a long and direct look that was not anger and not fear, and not pleading, but something quieter and more precise than any of those things. She pitied him. She could feel it not as an act of performance, but as a genuine and unexpected emotion, the specific pity you feel for someone who is about to do something that will cost them everything they have and can't see it yet. He was too far gone to recognize what he was looking at. He reached for her left wrist, then her right, and clicked the handcuffs closed, and Denise felt the cold metal settle against the skin where her watch usually sat. The watch she'd worn through 3 deployments, a gift from Isaiah on her 40th birthday, the one she'd taken off this morning to charge it because it was almost dead after 9 months of constant use. The metal was colder than she expected and harder than it needed to be, and Brandt tightened them with 1 extra click beyond what the procedure called for, and she felt the edge of the steel press against the thin skin of her inner wrist, felt the first faint warmth of blood beginning to track along her palm. She bit the inside of her cheek. She focused on the heat of the Jeep's hood in front of her, on the texture of the paint she'd been pressing her palms against, on the smell of diesel from the pump and the October air and the distant sound of traffic on Route 61, the sound of a world that was continuing without drama in every direction, except this one. She did not make a sound. Across the parking lot, Carl had put his gas cap back on. He stood beside his truck for a moment, with his hand still on the cap, looking at the scene with an expression that contained something complicated. Not indifference, not approval, but the particular discomfort of a man who knows he is watching something wrong and has already decided that the cost of saying so is higher than he is willing to pay. He got in his truck. He drove away. He didn't want to be a witness, didn't want the trouble, just wanted to not be here anymore. And the easiest way to not be somewhere is to leave. The woman in the minivan was still recording. Her oldest boy, 8 years old, maybe 9, pressed his face against the window and asked in a voice loud enough to carry through the glass, "Mom, why is the policeman being mean to that lady?" She pulled him back gently and whispered something that he didn't accept and kept watching anyway, and she kept filming. Amber was in the doorway of the convenience store with both hands wrapped around her phone so tightly that her knuckles had gone white, her eyes red-rimmed, not moving, not speaking, just watching with the particular helplessness of someone who desperately wants to do something and cannot locate what that something would be. Pryor had taken 3 steps away from all of it and was standing very still, with her arms at her sides, looking at a crack in the asphalt, the posture of someone trying very hard to be somewhere else in their own mind. Denise stood beside the cruiser with her hands cuffed behind her back and her chin level and her spine straight. And from where she was standing, she could see her Jeep, the cracked phone on the hood, the wallet, the photograph of Isaiah face down on the warm metal of the hood, the yellow sundress hidden against the gray paint invisible to the world. She thought about asking Amber to turn it over, to keep it safe, but she wouldn't give Brandt another word to twist. So she stood, and she breathed, and she waited the way she had waited through sandstorms, and delayed hearings, and promotion boards, where the people across the table looked at her like she needed to explain her own existence. The October wind pushed a paper cup across the asphalt in a slow, lazy arc. Somewhere behind the store, a dog barked twice and was quiet. Darius Webb was 16 years old, and he had been standing on the sidewalk across from the Riverside Fuel and Go for almost 5 minutes now. And in that time, he had not moved and had not looked at anything except what was happening in the parking lot. And his phone was up and level, and his hands were steady in a way that surprised him a little, because the rest of him didn't feel steady at all. He'd switched to landscape mode without thinking about it. He wasn't zooming in and out the way most people did when they were filming something, not trying to catch any particular detail, just holding the frame open, and still the way you hold still when you understand that what you're looking at is not a video, not content, it's documentation. It's the kind of thing that needs to exist afterward, and needs to exist clearly. And the only thing standing between it existing and not existing is whether you hold the phone steady enough and keep filming long enough, and don't let yourself be the reason it stops. He'd been live on Facebook for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. He had titled it, "Cop Arrests Black Woman at Gas Station for Wearing Army Hoodie." He hadn't thought about the title for more than a second. He'd just typed what he was looking at. At the 2-minute mark, the video had 300 views, and a column of angry face emojis scrolling too fast to count individually. At 5 minutes it crossed 2,000, and people were starting to share it with comments that ranged from, "This can't be real," to things that were not safe to say out loud, in polite company. And someone had already tagged the local CBS affiliate, and someone else had tagged the NAACP chapter, and a third person no one knew who had tagged the official Facebook page of the United States Army. At 9 minutes, 11,000. The algorithm had found it. The algorithm was systematic in the way. Weather is systematic. The way a fire is systematic. It doesn't discriminate. It just moves toward whatever is generating the most heat. And what was generating heat? Right now was the image of a black woman in handcuffs in a gas station parking lot, standing with her back straight and her chin level and her eyes forward, while a 27-year-old officer with a spearmint gum habit paced in front of her and performed certainty for a crowd that was starting to understand what it was actually looking at. Brandt had not noticed the phones. Or he had noticed and didn't think it mattered, which was a different kind of problem entirely. The kind of problem that comes from spending 4 years in a world where things happened without consequence, often enough that the idea of consequence had started to feel like something that applied to other people. Inside the parking lot, Denise stood and breathed. She could still feel the thin line of warmth along her palm where the cuff had broken the skin. She was aware of it without focusing on it, the way you are aware of a wound during the moment when the situation requires you to remain functional, filing it, acknowledging it, setting it aside until there is space to address it. She had treated worse in the field without stopping. She could manage this. She closed her eyes just for a second. She could still feel the heat of the forward operating base on her skin, even from here. 9 months of it lived into her body's memory. The rotors, the radio chatter, the particular weight of 800 people trusting her to make the right call under pressure that no one in this parking lot could fully imagine. She opened her eyes. She had made it through all of that. She could make it through a parking lot. Brandt was walking toward the cruiser to put Denise in the back seat when his radio crackled. Not the ordinary crackle of dispatch traffic, but a different kind of sound, a sharpness to it that made him stop mid-stride and bring his hand up to the radio before he'd consciously decided to. Unit 4, hold transport. Do not leave the scene. Repeat, hold transport. He stopped, frowned, keyed the mic, copy dispatch. What's going on, standby? Patching through a call, a pause. Static stretched across it, thin and electric. And then a voice came through that was not the dispatcher's voice, deeper, slower, with the unhurried cadence of someone who has spent so many years in command that the concept of needing to raise your voice to be taken seriously has become genuinely foreign to them, because people who hold that kind of authority don't need volume. This is Brigadier General Earl Whitfield, United States Army, Fort Bragg. Who am I speaking with? Brandt blinked. He looked at the radio in his hand, the way you look at something when your brain has received information that it doesn't yet know what category to put it in. This is Officer Kyle Brandt, Greenfield, PD. Officer Brandt. The general's voice did not change in any way, not warmer, not colder, not louder, just the same measured, implacable weight on every syllable, each word placed like a boot landing on hard ground. I'm going to say this once, and I need you to listen carefully. The parking lot was perfectly quiet. You have in your custody Colonel Denise Harmon. She is an active duty officer in the United States Army. She is the battalion commander of the 3rd Brigade Combat Team, 82nd Airborne Division. She has 22 years of distinguished service, 3 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Legion of Merit. A pause, brief, deliberate. She is not a fraud. She is not a criminal. She is one of the finest officers I have ever had the privilege of serving alongside. The radio hissed softly in the silence that followed. The October wind came off the highway and pushed against the cracked awning of the Riverside Fuel and Go, and made it creak a sound that was the only sound in the world for a moment. Do you understand what I just told you? Officer Brandt's mouth was open. Nothing came out. His hand on the radio had gone white at the knuckles. Yes, he said, finally. Yes, sir. Good. Now, here is what is going to happen. You are going to remove those handcuffs from Colonel Harmon immediately. You are going to return every item you removed from her person and her vehicle. And then you are going to inform your commanding officer that the United States Army will be filing a formal complaint with your department, your county, and the Department of Justice. The general's voice carried the finality of someone who has issued orders in situations where getting them wrong had consequences that bear no comparison to a gas station on Route 61. "Are we clear?" Darius's video had just crossed 40,000 views. The comments were scrolling too fast to read. Amber had both hands over her mouth. Tears were moving down her face in lines she didn't bother to wipe away. The woman in the minivan had put her phone down and was simply looking, one hand on the steering wheel and one hand on her son's shoulder, the posture of someone who has just understood what they are witnessing. Pryor was standing with her arms at her sides and her face the color of old paper, very still, in the way of someone who is making calculations that have no good answer. "Are we clear, Officer Brandt?" "Yes." His voice came out thinner than he intended. "Yes, sir. We're clear? Then move." Brandt clipped the radio back to his belt. His hands were shaking. Not violently, just enough a fine tremor that ran through his fingers and wouldn't stop the kind of shaking that has nothing to do with cold and everything to do with a body that has just processed something its owner is not yet ready to fully accept. He turned and began walking back toward Denise, and each step was slower than the last in a way he could not control, because something about the act of crossing that parking lot, now crossing the same 20 feet of cracked asphalt he'd crossed 20 minutes ago with absolute certainty in the direction of travel, felt like crossing something else entirely. Something that had a different geography than the one he'd been living in, and no obvious way back. Denise had not moved. She was still standing with her hands cuffed behind her back, spine, straight chin, level eyes. Forward, not defiant, not defeated, just fully and completely present in a way that had nothing to do with him, that didn't require his permission or his acknowledgement or anything from him at all. She was simply there the way a mountain is, there the way something with deep roots and long memory is there, and the uniform she wasn't wearing, and the rank she wasn't displaying, and the 22 years she'd spent becoming exactly who she was, were all there, with her invisible and completely real. She was waiting. Not for an apology, not for an explanation, not for him to find the right words, which was fortunate, because he couldn't find any words at all. She was waiting the way a colonel waits, with the particular patience of someone who understood, even before he did, that he was going to arrive at this moment eventually. He stopped in front of her. Something had changed in his face. Not remorse, exactly. Something rawer than that. Something that didn't have a good name, because it was the feeling of being seen clearly by someone who had every reason not to be generous in what they saw, and knowing that what they saw was exactly what you are, and nothing more. "I need to." He couldn't finish the sentence. He couldn't locate the end of it. He went around behind her. His fingers found the handcuff key and fumbled with the lock. Missed it once, caught the outside of the keyhole. Tried again. Missed again, the small mechanical failure of a man who has lost the easy confidence that makes simple things simple. And on the third attempt, the mechanism gave, and the cuffs clicked open. Denise brought her hands forward slowly. She looked at her left wrist. The thin red line the metal had pressed into the skin, not deep, but definite a mark, the shape of the cuff's inner edge, and she pressed her thumb against it gently, a brief and private acknowledgement. And then she turned around. Brandt was standing in front of her, badge on his chest, gun on his hip, 4 years of authority that had just ceased to function as authority in the span of a 90-second radio call. He looked smaller, not physically, but in the way a uniform can stop being what it is and become just fabric, just cloth on a body when the person inside it has been emptied of the thing that was making the uniform matter. "I'm sorry," he said. The words came out dry and cracked like something that had been stored in a place without moisture for a long time and was now being used for the first time in a while. Denise looked at him. a long, measuring look that went all the way down to the foundation of the man, and found there what she had suspected was there from the beginning, a certainty built on inheritance rather than evidence, a confidence that had never been tested by anything it wasn't already designed to beat, and under all of it, now that the scaffolding had come down, nothing particularly surprising. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not say, "I warned you." She said, "You didn't verify." 3 words. Quiet. Complete. The way you close a door when there's no reason to slam it. She walked to the hood of the Jeep. The cracked phone was lying where Brandt had left it. Face up, now the fracture line running through the screen in a diagonal catching the afternoon light, in a way that made it look almost intentional, like a signature. She picked it up, held it for a moment, put it in her pocket. She found the wallet, opened it, found the photograph her son in the yellow sundress, the flag, the grin that no one would ever be able to take from him, regardless of what happened to the paper it was printed on. And she turned it face up and looked at it for a moment, long enough to let the image do what it was meant to do, long enough to feel that the world was still the right size. She slid the photograph carefully back into its slot, put the wallet in her pocket. She got into the Jeep. She started the engine. She adjusted the rearview mirror and looked at the rectangle of parking lot. It showed her Brandt standing in the middle of it, not moving, the handcuffs still in his hand, the paper cup still circling his feet in the wind, the scene of something that had happened and could not be made to unhappen now. And she looked at it for the 2 or 3 seconds it took to signal before pulling forward. And then she signaled, and she pulled forward, and she did not look back. 38 miles. 38 miles to Isaiah, to the front door of the house she'd been leaving and returning to for 22 years, to the meal that would be waiting, to the shower and the bed and the particular peace of being somewhere you belong to. And that belongs to you. The engine was warm, and the heater was on low, and the radio was playing something she didn't recognize and didn't need to recognize. And she drove south on Route 61, the way she always drove, both hands on the wheel, speed, consistent eyes on the road ahead. Behind her, Kyle Brandt stood in the parking lot alone. The cruiser was still running. The cuffs were still in his hand. The wind pushed the paper cup in slow circles around his feet, and he stood there and did not move for a very long time. The way you stand when the thing you were certain of has left and taken everything with it. By the time Brandt drove back to the station, the video had crossed 200,000 views. He didn't know that yet. He was driving with both hands on the wheel and both eyes on the road, and the general's voice running through his head on a loop. He couldn't locate the off switch for one of the finest officers I have ever had the privilege of serving alongside. And each time the words completed their circuit, they landed with slightly more weight than the time before, like a stone dropping into water and finding that the water is deeper than expected, and the dropping is not done. He parked, walked inside. Sergeant Torres at the front desk, 15 years on the force, someone whose face Brandt had walked past several hundred times without it registering as anything other than a constant, looked up when he came through the door. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her expression said that she had already seen it, that everyone had already seen it, and that whatever he thought was going to happen in the next hour was not that. Captain Alan Dixon was in his office with the door open and the blinds down, and the monitor on his desk playing Darius Webb's video paused at the precise moment the cuffs closed on Denise Harmon's wrists. The freeze frame was unambiguous in the way that only the truth caught in real time can be unambiguous. Brandt's face twisted with the certainty of a man who has never once considered that he might be wrong, and Denise's face giving away absolutely nothing serene as a judge. "Sit down," Dixon said. Brandt sat. Dixon remained standing. "Tell me what happened." Brandt got as far as I observed a female individual wearing military insignia before Dixon raised one hand. I've watched the video. All 11 minutes. I've also pulled your body cam footage. Both angles tell the same story. He sat down behind the desk, removed his reading glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose in the way of a man who has been doing this long enough to know the difference between mistakes that can be repaired and mistakes that cannot, and who has found himself looking at the second kind. You detained an active duty colonel in the United States Army. You accused her of stolen valor without running a single verification check. You searched her vehicle without a warrant or her consent. You ignored a valid CAC card with a Department of Defense hologram. You ignored a Bronze Star citation. You ignored official transfer orders bearing a general signature. And when your partner suggested you call it in, you refused. Each sentence landed with its own weight, separate and distinct, the way you drive nails when you're building something that needs to hold. You didn't just make a mistake, Kyle. You made choices. Multiple choices at every single point where a reasonable officer would have stopped, and you kept going. And as of right now, I have a brigadier general on the phone, a video with 500,000 views and climbing, and the NAACP requesting a formal investigation. The number sat in Brandt's chest like something swallowed wrong. Dixon extended his hand across the desk, palm up. Brandt looked at it for a moment. Then he reached up and unclipped the badge from his chest slowly, as if removing it. Quickly might break something and set it on the desk. Then the service weapon. The metal made a dull, heavy sound against the wood, the sound of something ending. Caldwell Brandt asked. His voice had gone rough in a way he didn't entirely control. Pryor is being formally reprimanded for failure to intervene. She'll keep her position, but she's on notice, and Internal Affairs will interview both of you separately. Dixon looked at him steadily. Get a lawyer, Kyle. You're going to need one. Brandt walked out through the station past Torres, past the break room, where two officers went silent the moment he appeared in the doorway, past the bulletin board with the department's mission statement pinned to it in bold letters. Integrity, accountability, service, and pushed through the front door into the parking lot. It was dark now. The October sky had turned from denim to ink. His cruiser had already been impounded for evidence review. His gray Honda Civic was in the back row. He sat in it for 12 minutes before he started the engine. Internal Affairs opened a formal case on Officer Kyle Brandt within 48 hours, and when they pulled his personnel records, they found something that should have been a warning, years before it became an occasion for an investigation. 4 prior complaints, all from people of color, all describing the same pattern with enough consistency that it stopped looking like coincidence and started looking like method. There had been a Latino man pulled over on Route 61 for a broken taillight, who ended up face down on the shoulder of the road, while Brandt searched his trunk for 40 minutes without finding anything, without apology, and without any entry in the incident report indicating that the search had taken place. There had been a black teenager stopped 2 blocks from his own house for matching a description that turned out, when anyone bothered to verify it, to describe someone 4 inches shorter and 40 pounds heavier. There had been a couple questioned at a rest stop for what the report called suspicious behavior, which turned out to be eating lunch in their own car, which they could prove with documentation that Brandt had declined to review. And there had been an elderly black woman asked at a routine traffic stop to prove that she owned the vehicle she was driving. 4 complaints, 4 internal reviews, 4 findings of insufficient evidence. 4 times the file was closed, and Brandt went back to work with a record that still read clean and a badge that still shone under the station lights. Not this time. Attorney Diane Prescott, a former JAG officer who had spent the 15 years since leaving the military building civil rights cases in a D.C. law office, and who had developed a particular ability to see the shape of a pattern from the inside of a single incident, had watched Darius Webb's video 3 times on the night it was posted, pausing each time at the same frame. And then she had picked up the phone and called Denise Harmon. The federal civil rights complaint she filed 72 hours later was 41 pages long. It named Brandt individually. It named Pryor for failure to intervene. It named the Greenfield Police Department for what it described as a documented culture of inadequate review and the county for failures of training and oversight that had allowed 4 prior complaints to move through the process without result, and had therefore created the conditions in which a 5th was inevitable. Prescott had built cases like this before. She knew exactly where the weak points were, and she wrote toward them with the precision of someone who has learned that the difference between a complaint that changes things and one that disappears into a filing cabinet is almost always a matter of structure. The case moved fast. Media coverage started local, the Greenfield Gazette, 2 TV affiliates, a radio station that had been covering the police department for years and had never seen anything accelerate this quickly, and then national. CNN ran it on a Tuesday night. The anchor's introduction became its own piece of viral content, screen-grabbed and shared and printed on T-shirts. A 22-year Army veteran was handcuffed at a gas station for wearing her own unit's patch. The officer who arrested her had 3 years on the job. She had 3 combat deployments, simple arithmetic, the kind that doesn't require explanation. MSNBC asked Denise for an interview. She sat in the studio in Fayetteville in her pressed dress uniform with the colonel's eagle at her collar and her hands folded on the desk, and when the host asked her what it had felt like to stand in that parking lot with her hands cuffed behind her back, she was quiet for a moment before she answered. "I felt like I was 19 years old again," she said. Like 22 years of service didn't exist. Like the uniform I'd bled for was invisible, because the only thing he could see was my skin. The clip was viewed 12 million times in 2 days. Denise did not retreat into the comfort of being the victim everyone felt sorry for, and she did not allow the story to stay contained to what had happened to her personally, because she understood from long experience that stories about individuals are easy to dismiss, and stories about patterns are much harder to look away from. She wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post. She wrote about the 4 complaints in Brandt's file and about the way each one had been reviewed and closed without sustained finding, and about what it means when a structure that is supposed to catch repeated misconduct reviews it 4 times and each time decides that what it's looking at is not what it's looking at. She did not use the word that describes something operating across every level of an institution at once. Instead, she wrote about a culture that had settled into a set of habits. Habits of dismissal, habits of protection, habits of looking at a complaint and finding reasons not to act on it that were easier and more comfortable than acting on it would have been. She wrote about Pryor, not with anger, with something more useful than anger, something more precise. Officer Pryor read my Bronze Star citation with her own eyes, she wrote. She saw the general's signature. She knew. And she stepped back. She wrote that the structure that allows misconduct to persist doesn't only fail because of the officers who commit it. It fails because of the officers who watch it happen and choose the easier thing. That paragraph was quoted in congressional testimony 3 weeks later by a senator from Georgia who had read the op-ed 3 times before she could put it down. The disciplinary hearing was held on a Wednesday morning in November in a small room with a long table, and 5 members of the Civilian Review Board who had spent the previous evening reading 4 complaint files and a 41-page federal brief and watching 14 minutes of body cam footage and listening to the audio of General Whitfield's voice moving through a radio at a gas station on Route 61. Brandt sat at one end of the table in a navy suit that looked like it had been bought for the occasion. No badge, no gun, no belt. He looked like a man who has been removed from the context in which he made sense and cannot figure out how to occupy space without it. His attorney argued reasonable suspicion, field verification limitations, said the CAC card was insufficient identification in an uncontrolled environment, said the hoodie and patch constituted visible grounds for inquiry under existing statute. The board listened. Then they played the body cam footage, all 14 minutes. They played the audio of the general's call. They played Darius Webb's video. They read the 4 prior complaints aloud one by one, with dates and names and specific details, the cumulative weight of them settling over the room like weather. Brandt's attorney stopped speaking after the 3rd. The board's decision was unanimous. Termination effective immediately. Brandt was permanently barred from serving in any law enforcement capacity in the state. His certification was revoked. His name was entered into the National Decertification Index, a database that travels with an officer across every department in every state for the duration of whatever career they might otherwise have had. There would be no transfer, no quiet resignation, and fresh start somewhere smaller and less watched. The record would go with him. Pryor received a formal written reprimand, 12 months of probation, 80 hours of mandatory bias, intervention training, and removal from patrol duty pending evaluation. She submitted a transfer request to a department in another county 3 days later. She didn't say anything to the press. She didn't say anything to anyone. The county moved with a speed that surprised people who had been asking for these particular changes for more than a decade. The Board of Supervisors held an emergency session. The vote was unanimous, mandatory implicit bias training for every law enforcement officer in the county every year, without exception. They also approved the creation of an independent civilian oversight committee with real authority, not advisory authority, the kind that could access body cam footage and review complaints and recommend discipline and have that recommendation carry weight, which was the thing that community members had been asking for at public meetings for 11 years and had been told each time was not currently feasible. It turned out that what makes something feasible is often simply a matter of what just happened. Denise was invited to speak at the first Joint Police Community Forum held under the new policy. The room was standing room only officers in the front 2 rows, community members filling everything behind them, local press lining the walls, the particular charged stillness of a room full of people who are not sure what they are about to witness, but know that it matters. She stood at the podium in her dress uniform. She did not bring notes. She didn't need them. "I'm not here to punish anyone," she said. And the room was quiet enough that her voice reached every corner of it without effort. "I'm not here because I want revenge. I'm here because what happened to me at that gas station wasn't new. It wasn't rare. It wasn't something that came out of nowhere. It was a pattern. One complaint at a time, one closed file at a time, one moment of someone stepping back instead of speaking up, and patterns don't break themselves." She looked at the officers in the front rows. Some of them met her eyes. Some of them didn't. "I don't need you to agree with me," she said. "I need you to verify before you act. That's all. Verify. One phone call, 30 seconds, and none of what happened last October happens." The room was quiet for a long moment after she stepped back from the podium. Then someone in the back of the room started clapping. Then someone else. Then the whole room building in the way that things build when they've been held back long enough that releasing them feels like relief. The officers in the front rows were the last to join, but they joined, 6 months after the morning at the Riverside Fuel and Go. Amber was not working the counter anymore. She had stood in the doorway of that convenience store with her phone shaking in her hands and watched a woman get handcuffed for being exactly who she said she was, and she had done nothing but record it, and that had not been enough for her. Not because recording was wrong, but because standing in a doorway, watching, was the least she could do. And she had decided She wanted to do more than the least. She enlisted. Fort Jackson. 3 months in learning to march and qualify and stand at attention for longer than she had believed her body could manage. She wrote Denise a letter, 2 pages, handwritten on notebook paper, the handwriting of someone still figuring out how to say what they mean in words. She said she had joined because of her. She said she wanted to be the kind of person who walks towards something, instead of watching it from a doorway. Denise kept the letter in the same drawer as her Legion of Merit. The first night Denise was home after the meal and the long shower, and the first real sleep in 9 months, Isaiah found the cracked phone on the kitchen counter and didn't say anything about it. He just found the photograph, his mother in her dress uniform, him in the yellow sundress, both of them grinning, and put it in the old wooden frame that had been sitting empty on his bookshelf for a year, and set it back where it could be seen. When Denise noticed it the next morning, she didn't say anything either. She just straightened the frame by a fraction of an inch so the image sat perfectly level. The yellow sundress looking out, the little flag raised, the Riverside fuel. And go. On Route 61 looked the same as it ever had. The 2 pumps, the cracked awning, the parking lot that still needed repaving. But taped to the wall beside the register, in the spot where Amber used to lean and scroll her phone on slow afternoons, was a piece of paper she had put up before she left. 4 words in blue ink, written small and straight. Verify before you judge. Nobody took it down. If this story stayed with you, if you saw yourself somewhere in it, in the people who watched, or the people who didn't speak, or the one person who held the camera, steady, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that accountability and dignity should never be in conflict with each other, subscribe to our channel and hit the bell, because we'll keep telling these stories for as long as they need to be told.